Hello, welcome to Pensions in 10 with me, David Brooks, and my colleague Andy Knight-Stevens. This week, we take a look through where we are with ESG and investments. We also look at Lord Vallance's speech, calling for more investment into the sector of science. Then finally, we tackle the thorny subject of pre-97 pension increases. Okay, Andy, so for our first little section here, let's talk through a few more investment-related issues as we have you here with us. So first, let's take a look at what's happening in the world of ESG. There's been a survey out there looking at how the profession is approaching ESG and also other moves within the LPFA and Railpen. I think you can bring up to speed on both of those.
Yeah, sure, Dave. So there was a recent poll by the Society of Pensions Professionals, and that revealed that 84% of pension professionals support integrating environmental, social, and governance factors into investment decisions. So that's of pension professionals, so it might not be a surprise, but it does reflect strong industry commitment to impact investing. So that's good. Of the same survey, so only 9% opposed that idea. 7% were unsure. So I think overall, that's a broad consensus on the importance of considering those different factors, environmental and societal, alongside financial returns for pension schemes. So it's a good thing. I don't think anyone should be surprised by that result. The same survey, though, however, credible data remains the biggest barrier that was talked about. So 32% of the respondents thought so. Other challenges there: governance constraints, 27%, reporting fatigue, I'm sure we all can feel that, 19%, and concerns about underperformance in this area, 19%. This is really interesting, I think. Member or stakeholder opposition to ESG integrating was minimal, only 3%, so it might be a surprise by some, suggesting resistance from beneficiaries or stakeholders was not a major issue. I think the chair of the SPP said something like, despite recent backlash, or if you read certain news outlets against ESG, the findings do show that the UK pensions industry are serious about sustainable investing and are trying to integrate those factors well into the process. So that's just an interesting update. I'll go straight on to the second one, though. So various large pension schemes have been in the news. They've been ramping up their climate action. So Dave, you did say, so it's the London Pensions Fund Authority and Railpen here. So they've both reaffirmed climate commitments. The LPFA first, it's produced its first RI report in 5 years, and it's highlighted significant progress in reducing emissions and integrating climate action on its portfolio. So that's a good thing. It's also deepened its involvement in various initiatives in this area. I might just pull out one quote. The CEO, Joanne Donnelly, said, "Investing responsibly is about maximizing returns, but considering the real world outcomes of our investments as well." I think that's a really good quote. Then just moving on, Railpen, it's updated its net zero plan. It's also surpassed its 2025 emissions target early. So that's a really good thing, and on course to deliver 50% emissions cut by 2030. So real positive developments there for those big schemes.
Excellent stuff. Just for my interest, Andy, given your role as an investment consultant, how do you find the conversation with your clients? You probably have a range, of clients, probably DB mainly, but on the journey to buy in, but also some continuing on for the foreseeable future. And I suppose just how that conversation, presents itself, and what the reaction of trustees, lay trustees, professional trustees, and there might be differences in there as well, just from your perspective.
Yes, it's a good question. So there's a variety of responses, Dave, and various stakeholder comments. I think training is important for some. We've had to go back to basics on training, re-emphasize how this fits into their strategy, what are the risks, and also understand time frame and where you're exposed to those risks. Also, there's a lot of acronyms, and ESG, that's one that's quite common, but there's loads of technical detail on acronyms. So we've gone back to basics on training. Some schemes are approaching buy-in. Maybe we've done a bit less work there, but obviously it's important to assess the insurer as well. It's a long-term investment, and assess their credentials in the ESG space. Others who, quite rightly, some of these larger pension funds, and the quotes in the news here have emphasised it. If you've got a long journey ahead of you as a pension scheme, you are exposed to risks, including climate change risk, and it's one of the challenges of our time. So we've tried to emphasise that with our clients, and clearly, there's always governance constraints, budget constraints. So we've tried to do what we can, but clearly it is a risk and needs to be looked at.
Okay, Andy. Actually, this is an error because I was meant to tag this onto the last piece, but we stopped and waffled on about something else. But here we go. This is the way these things work. So Lord Vallance gave a speech at the BVCA Pensions and Private Capital Showcase. I didn't get an invite, but I don't know what that was. But can you give us a bit of insight what he was talking about and how that relates to pension schemes?
Sure, I can definitely do that, Dave. Yes, so there's a long acronym there, but the summary is, Lord Vallance said UK pension funds should invest more in science. So that's the headline. So obviously, take it into context a bit. That comes as the Chancellor is pushing for UK pension funds to increase their allocations to private markets as well, and to direct where people's retirement savings are allocated. Here's a quote: "Far too many UK companies are operating at the cutting edge of emerging technology, so that's AI, biotech, and things like that. And Lord Vallance thinks UK investors are underexposed." So, we come back to the age-old discussion. We talked about this quite a few times, Dave, haven't we, on fiduciary duty and forced allocations. But clearly there are a number of people and parties saying pension fund capital should go here, it should go there, but it's a continuation of that private markets theme. So just one thing Lord Vallance highlighted. So it's a success story of ARM. So that was a British, or is a British innovation, and it scaled globally, that company, but it was largely funded by overseas capital. So that was referenced in this speech, and used an example, underscores UK's strength in research and in innovation, which clearly we have, but also a challenge. So insufficient domestic capital to scale those homegrown companies, and that was the urge. Pension investors and capital should be going to that and acting now. And there was a parallel drawn with Canadian pensioners and pension schemes who they benefited from investing in UK tech. So it's just that continuation of that push for pension scheme capital to be put to these uses. Okay, Dave, another news item that's been hitting the newsstands is pre-97 pensioner tranche. Can you shed some light on what's been occurring in the news?
Yeah, there was a bit of a flurry of stories, some even breaking out of the trade press into the national news. So they're all of a theme, but perhaps coming at slightly different angles. So the Pensions Action Group were stating their disappointment that some amendments to the pensions bill, which would require pre-97 pensions to be increased, were rejected by the government. I suppose I should just quickly say, pre-97 pensions, so we're talking about DB schemes where members were in the scheme before the 5th of April 1997, where there was no statutory requirement to provide pension increases in that time outside contracted out benefits. So some GMP might have had some increase, would have had some increases if that was accrued. So this is obviously an issue: rising inflation, pensions not maintaining pace with the cost of living, and so this was an amendment that was put in to the bill to require schemes to increase pre-97 pensions. Rejected. Then we've had Unite also saying that PPF should use its surplus. It has a surplus of around 80%. I think it's like 180% funded or something. So £14 billion, that they should use this to fund pre-97 increases, because in the PPF there are no increases to pre-97 benefits, irrespective of what the rules may have said at the time. If you come into the PPF, you don't get any increases. And then we had some pensioners in the Hewlett-Packard pension scheme saying that their benefits don't increase by inflation for pre-97, and that the scheme should top those up as well. So this is a topic that's going to keep going around, I think. For as long as inflation remains high, it's going to be controversial, and for as long as the PPF has a large surplus, this is going to be controversial. And I say controversial because there are views on both sides, and it's not just pensioners and Unite and action groups that say that pre-97 benefits should be increased. Pension professionals, there's views within the industry that perhaps we should be reviewing this, especially given the size of the PPF surplus. The PPF could potentially help people. I think it starts getting controversial, and as you get other voices on the other side, it gets controversial because the pension scheme was set up to provide those benefits. That was the agreement at the time. Pre-97, they didn't have to have increases. This is sort of a benefit changes by the back door. This is what the scheme promised. For many people, and I don't know, Hewlett Packard or BP is another one which kicks around. I don't know what the rules were at the time, but for a lot of those members, they weren't paying money into that pension scheme. A lot of those were non-contributory pension schemes at that time. So that was the deal. Yes, it's not great. It's not inflation linked, but that was the deal. And it starts getting more and more complicated the more you think, well, okay, maybe the PPF could do something with that surplus, and perhaps they could. But what do they do? Do they do that for all members? Just so pre-97 get something, but also other members get something else? What do we do about people that didn't go into the PPF because their benefits and their scheme was slightly higher than that was, the funding would require them to fall into the PPF, but they didn't provide pre-97 increases outside? Do they need to be topped up? And this is without the sort of overlay of the people that have been paying into the PPF over the last 20 odd years have been the employers. And do they need some money back because they've been over funding effectively what the PPF needed to pay those benefits? So I don't know where this is going to end up. The government have said in the past, Paul Maynard, the previous pensions minister, has said that he would look into this, but then I think he realised how complicated it might get, depending on what he did. And it remains something that the Working Pensions Committee do keep returning to note as something that could change. So I think the problem of the surplus is going to remain, and it starts. There is a moral argument as well. You have all this money, then we probably should do something to help members who aren't as well off as they could be. And would that cost everybody a lot of money? Maybe not. Maybe £1 billion could be used, and the scheme, PPF would still be 13 billion in surplus. I don't know. I don't know how much it would cost. Maybe you could do one-off payments or something as well. It doesn't have to be something to affect the funding for the future. I don't know. There's lots of ideas out there, but this is definitely something that the industry needs to keep an eye on and how it develops over time.
So there's one, it could rumble on, it will rumble on, but it's a bit of a minefield when you actually get to the technicals and everyone's different tranches and increase in situations. You could definitely see a view where if you're a pension scheme member, you're in the PPF or pension scheme member, and you don't know too much about this industry and whatnot, and you see massive surplus in the PPF. The title of it itself is Pension Protection Fund, and you're like, well, I'll spend some of that money on my non-increasing, inflation-eroded pension, please. So you can definitely see some views, but there's a lot to consider.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for listening. Thanks, Andy, for being with me this week. So please do like and subscribe via our website if you want to get these into your inbox. You can also share the story on LinkedIn or comment if you thought something was interesting. I also wanted to give a very quick shout out because I was on a podcast last week with Darren Philp and Nico Aspinall, their excellent VFM podcast, which is a lot longer than this. So we talked for about an hour or so on all things pensions rather than trying to squeeze it into 10 minutes and obviously failing to get into 10 minutes. But if you want to hear my views on a more broad range of issues and with a bit more time, then please do check out their podcast as well. But if not, we'll see you here next week.